If you know lenses, you know this already. Some Leica glass never becomes ordinary. It only becomes more respected, more desired, and more untouchable with time. Leica has made many great lenses, but only a few became names that photographers never really stopped talking about. This list is about those lenses. Welcome to Alt Buzz Lenses. If lenses like these are why you are here, make sure you are subscribed to Alt Buzz Lenses. At number 7, we have the Leica Summicron-M 50mm f2. And before you move past this one thinking, it is the modest entry, stop. Because this lens is the first proof that Leica legend does not require extremes. This is where Leica proved that simplicity could become legend. There is nothing about the Summicron M50 on paper that screams mythology. It is a 50mm, it is f2. It is not the fastest aperture Leica ever built. It is not the rarest. It is not the most expensive. And yet, if you were to sit in a room of serious Leica photographers and ask which lens earned the most quiet, consistent, unshakable respect across decades, this one would come up. Again and again. The Summicron name itself traces back to 1953. And the 50mm focal length has been a cornerstone of the M system since the very beginning, which tells you something about how deeply this lens is woven into Leica's identity. The reason is what it does when you pick it up and shoot. The Summicron M50 has a rendering quality that feels balanced in a way very few lenses ever achieve. It is sharp without being clinical. It has presence without being theatrical. The current version, the 5th generation design, weighs just 240 grams and focuses down to 70 centimeters, making it one of the most practically capable lenses in the M lineup, while still carrying all the optical character the name promises. Leica refined this lens through multiple generations, and each version carried the same character forward. That continuity is what separates a standard from a product. And standards, when they hold long enough, become legend quietly, without ever needing to announce themselves. And somehow, Leica still had lenses with even more aura than this. At number 6, we have the Leica Summicron-M 35mm f2. This is not just a street lens, it is one of the reasons Leica street photography became a language of its own. If the 50 gives you balance, the 35 gives you a relationship with the world. Wide enough to include context. Tight enough to keep intention. And on a rangefinder body, it becomes something almost intuitive, the kind of lens that starts to disappear when you shoot, where you stop thinking about focal length and start thinking only about what is in front of you. The 35 Summicron has existed in multiple versions across its history, with the iconic 8-element design from the 1960s. Known among collectors simply as the king of bokeh version, still regarded as one of the most characterful lenses Leica ever produced at this focal length. The Summicron M35 traveled through documentary work, street portraiture, editorial journalism, and personal projects that eventually ended up in galleries and history books. It was not the lens photographers chose because it was fashionable. It was the lens they chose because it got out of the way and let them see. That quality, a lens that serves the eye rather than performing for it, is rarer than any aperture rating can suggest. The current aspherical version resolves with extraordinary precision, while still maintaining the open, natural rendering character that made earlier versions famous, a balance that is genuinely difficult to achieve and even more difficult to sustain across a redesign. Simple, direct, timeless. And in the world of Leica, timeless is the highest compliment a lens can earn. That was the respected classic. The next one is where Leica legend turns more precise and more elite. Number 5, we have the Leica APO-Summicron-M 90mm, f2 aspherical. This is where the list changes mood entirely. This is where Leica stops feeling romantic and starts feeling seriously, almost intimidatingly elite. The APO designation matters more than most people who have never used this lens understand. Apochromatic correction means the lens is designed to bring multiple wavelengths of light into focus at exactly the same plane. In practice, what that produces is a clarity that does not look like digital sharpness. It does not look processed or enhanced. It looks like the image was simply recorded at a resolution that the world around us actually contains, and that most other lenses quietly fail to capture. When it was introduced, optical specialists considered it among the finest production lenses in the world at any focal length, a statement that was not made lightly and has not been seriously challenged since. Photographers who have used the APO-Summicron-M90 describe it with a kind of reverence that sounds almost uncomfortable when applied to a piece of glass. They talk about the three-dimensional quality of its rendering. They talk about how skin tones look in portraits, not just accurate but present. They talk about a transition from sharp to soft focus that feels drawn rather than calculated. The lens contains 11 elements in 9 groups and uses 2 anomalous partial dispersion glass elements specifically to achieve that apochromatic correction. A construction that reflects the level of engineering commitment Leica was willing to make to reach a result that most photographers would never fully be able to explain, but would immediately feel. This lens did not just prove that Leica could make beautiful glass. It proved that Leica could make glass that pushed against the technical limits of what a lens was capable of producing. That is a different kind of legend, less emotional, more absolute. If that lens earned admiration, the next one earned the loyalty of people who go deepest into this world. If you are still here and feeling what this list is doing, you already know this channel is for you. Hit subscribe and stay with us. The next 2 entries will genuinely change how you think about Leica glass. At number 4, we have the Leica R 180mm f2 APO-Summicron. This is the entry that rewards the viewer who already goes deep. Not everyone will recognize this name immediately, and that is precisely the point. The Leica R system was Leica's foray into single-lens reflex territory, a different mount, a different body, a different world from the rangefinder lenses most people associate with the brand. And within that system, the 180mm APO-Summicron at f2 stands as one of the most technically serious telephoto lenses Leica ever produced. The lens weighs approximately 2 kilograms and was manufactured in relatively limited numbers compared to Leica's M-mount lineup, which over time gave it a collector weight that its optical reputation alone would have justified anyway. Apochromatic correction at 180mm, a maximum aperture of f2. A build quality that made the lens feel less like a tool and more like a precision instrument. This was not a casual buyer's lens. It was made for photographers who needed something specific and were willing to commit fully to Leica's standards to get it. What turned it into legend is not who used it, it is what it represented. In a market where telephoto glass was often treated as functional rather than desirable, this lens made a case that even a working telephoto could carry the full weight of the Leica name without compromise. It also demonstrated that Leica's optical philosophy, the pursuit of apochromatic correction, the refusal to accept chromatic aberration as an acceptable trade-off, was not limited to compact rangefinder glass but extended across the full range of what the brand was willing to build. Serious Leica historians know this lens the way serious readers know the quiet chapter that changes the meaning of everything that came before it. That was the historian's legend. The next one is where the list becomes emotional and where Leica starts to feel like something you do not just respect, but genuinely, deeply want. At number 3, we have the Leica Summilux-M 35mm f1.4. This is where Leica stopped feeling practical and started feeling untouchable. If the Summicron 35 is the lens that made documentary photography feel true, the Summilux 35 is the lens that made Leica feel cinematic and alive. That one extra stop of light from f2 to f1.4 does something to their rendering that numbers alone cannot describe. It opens up a quality of light separation, a depth of field behavior, a way the background dissolves and the subject arrives, that made photographers fall in love in a way that is almost irrational. The Summilux-M 35 was first introduced in 1961 and across its various versions, including the pre-aspherical steel rim editions that now command serious collector prices. It has maintained a reputation for rendering character that feels almost impossible to replicate with modern, clinical precision optics. This lens was never just used, it was wanted. Photographers did not simply add the Summilux-35 to their kit the way they might add a standard zoom. They aspired to it. They thought about it. They remembered the first time they saw images made with it and thought, that is the kind of photographer I want to be. The current aspherical version addressed the focus shift issues that earlier versions were known for, a technical correction that made the lens more reliable at wider apertures without stripping away the expressive, rendering quality that built its reputation across 6 decades. That kind of emotional pull, the kind that attaches itself not just to the results but to the identity of the person holding the camera, is exactly what separates a great lens from a legendary one. The Summilux-M35 became more than glass. It became a statement of intent, and if that lens earned desire, the next one earned something closer to obsession. At number 2, we have the Leica Noctilux-M 50mm f1.0. This lens was never just admired, it was chased. When Leica pushed the Noctilux to f1.0, it was doing something no other manufacturer was seriously attempting in the rangefinder world, building a lens that could see in near darkness, not just work in low light. See in it, resolve it. Render it with a quality that made darkness feel like a legitimate creative space rather than a technical limitation to be managed. The f1.0 version was produced from 1976 to 2008, a production run of over 3 decades, and in that time it became one of the most recognizable and sought-after lenses in the entire history of the M system. The bokeh the f1.0 Noctilux produced was unlike anything standard optical formulas could offer, soft in a way that felt almost liquid. Light sources in the background rendered with a quality photographers began describing as glow, not aberration, not weakness, but a quality so distinct it became the point. The lens used 2 aspherical elements at a time when aspherical glass production was extraordinarily difficult and expensive, making each copy a genuinely complex manufacturing achievement. The word Noctilux stopped being a product name inside the Leica community and became something closer to a concept, a way of describing a certain relationship between a lens and darkness and the world that exists on the edge of what light can do. When people said Noctilux, they were not just naming a piece of glass, they were invoking an entire aesthetic. Unmistakably, irreplaceably Leica. And then Leica did something almost no one expected. They went further. At number 1, we have the Leica Noctilux 50mm f0.95 aspherical. This is where Leica myth became modern luxury legend, an aspherical maximum aperture of f0.95 on a 50mm lens for a rangefinder system. This was not simply a technical achievement, it was a declaration, a statement that Leica's ambition had not softened with time, that the brand which had built its name on optical seriousness across the better part of a century was still willing to do things that felt frankly excessive in pursuit of something that most photographers would never need and almost every photographer would want. Introduced in 2008, the f0.95 aspherical Noctilux contains 10 elements in 7 groups, weighs approximately 700 grams, and carries a price that has consistently placed it among the most expensive production lenses available for any system, a position it has held without apology. At its widest aperture, the f0.95 aspherical Noctilux produces a depth of field so shallow that the plane of focus feels almost physically present. Like a layer you could reach into, the rendering sits somewhere between optical character and visual emotion. It is not the sharpest lens Leica ever made. It does not need to be. It has something more interesting than sharpness. It has presence. It asks something of you. It requires a way of seeing, a patience with focus, a willingness to work with what it gives you, rather than correcting for it. And in return, it produces images that look like nothing else. Despite being over 15 years into its production life, the f/0.95 spherical has never been replaced, never been succeeded, and has only grown in its hold on the imagination of photographers who understand what it represents, which is perhaps the clearest possible proof that it belongs exactly where it sits on this list. That combination, the excessive aperture, the impossible rendering, the price that removes all pretense of practicality, the results that justify all of it, is why this lens became the one photographers return to when they want to explain what makes Leica different from everything else. Unreasonable in the best possible way. And completely, utterly untouchable. Some Leica lenses became respected, some became desired, but a few crossed into something else entirely, into the space where glass becomes symbol and a name carries weight that no specification can explain. That is why the Noctilux still feels untouchable, and that is why this list will never feel finished. If this kind of lens history is what you love, subscribe to Alt Buzz Lenses. There's a lot more glass worth talking about, and we are just getting started.